Welcome, everybody. This is a session brought to you by the ITE-ANZ section, and we're going to talk today about the New South Wales Guide to Transport Impact Assessments. So welcome. My name is David Nash, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Firstly, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the ITE-ANZ acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We also acknowledge and respect the Treaty of Waitangi and the Maori as the original people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So just in case you don't know much about the ITE, we are a very large organisation throughout the world, even though we're fairly small in Australia and New Zealand. There are about 18,000 members in 75 countries. And one of the advantages of the ITE for us here in Australia is that we have those connections to so many people overseas. So you're always welcome to join us. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. They're all listed there on the screen, and we thank them for their support, which enables us to bring webinars to you like this at no cost. Just a bit of housekeeping. You're all muted, so you can make as much noise as you like in the background there. We won't be able to hear you. If you've got any technical problems, send messages via the chat. But if you've got questions to ask the presenters, please put it into the Q&A so that we can keep track of what questions people are asking. So with that, I'd like to introduce our three esteemed speakers for the day. So I'll introduce all three of them together. Jen Adam is the Director of South and West Region in Transport for New South Wales. All three of our presenters are from Transport for New South Wales. And Jen has over 20 years' experience delivering multimodal, network, corridor and place-based transport plans for the government. She plays a key role in the Guide to Transport Impact Assessment and is currently working to deliver a program of strategic regional integrated transport plans across New South Wales. And she's Vice President of the New South Wales branch of the AITPM. Sahan Wijaratna is the Acting Director of Transport Strategy and Guidance, and he's a leader with over 10 years' experience in transport planning, management and engineering. He's worked across multiple public and private sector roles, including driving major project business cases, strategy development and the delivery of the guidelines we're going to talk about today. He holds a double degree in engineering and finance. And the third speaker is Henry Chu. He's a senior transport planner in the Land Use Development and Assessment Unit at the Transport for New South Wales Agency. He successfully project managed the Guide to Transport Impact Assessment. He's got 18 years of local and international experience across the public and private sectors. He understands the work environments of key stakeholders in the transport and planning industries. He also has master's degrees in urban planning from the University of Melbourne. So there are our three speakers today, and I'd like to hand over to Jen to start the session.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's ITE-ANZ seminar on the Guide to Transport Impact Assessment. I'm Jennifer Adam, a Director in Transport Planning at Transport for New South Wales. We're happy to have so many people on the call today and excited to share this with you and to dive into the detail of this work. I'd also just like to say we're grateful to the acknowledgement we received for this work from ITE-ANZ last year and the lovely time I had at the dinner in Melbourne with ITE members and hearing in lots and lots of detail about autonomous vehicles. Before we get started, the Q&A function's up and running, so please feel free to post a question and we'll have time to go through those at the end. And just to further acknowledge, I'm joined by two of my colleagues from Transport, Sahan Wijaratna and Henry Chu. The three of us are going to present on the Guide to Transport Impact Assessment. plunging into the details of some of the key changes that should be of real interest to you on the call and outline how we've engaged and listened to industry feedback to get to this point. It was great to be part of a team developing this update, in particular hearing from and applying the insights from our industry consultation and embedding the latest research to develop this robust update. And just get those questions flowing, and we'll happily engage with you on them at the end. Adding to David's intro, I'd like to add from us that Transport pays respect to elders past and present and recognises and celebrates the diversity of Aboriginal peoples, their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Cammeraygal people in the lower North Shore of Sydney. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands around Australia in which you're all working today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Over 20 years ago, I started my career in the newly established Land Use and Development Assessment team at the New South Wales Roads and Traffic Authority in our Newcastle office. My desk had a copy of the fairly fresh Guide to Traffic Generating Development in a ring binder, printed out and everything. I think there was colour on the cover. The RTA's draft LUDA guidelines, which had been stolen from our old Blacktown office, and several 5-volume mining EISs. With the privilege of time as a graduate, I read them all, and I've internalized many of these details, and I've seen how we've used them across the many facets of transport planning I've been involved with since then. But while I haven't aged at all in the last 20 years, the same cannot be said for the 2002 Guide to Traffic Generating Development. So I'm delighted to start by sharing an overview of this guide with you all. So what is the Guide to Transport Impact Assessment? For those of you who aren't aware of the context, this guide was the first full update since the Guide to Traffic Generating Development in 2002 that was released by the former New South Wales Roads and Traffic Authority. The new guide provides updated technical guidance for the preparation and assessment of transport impact assessments and will be used by transport practitioners, developers, and consent authorities across New South Wales. The new guide also supports the New South Wales Government's housing agenda, in particular with reduced reporting for less complex or lower impact developments, aiming to streamline this process. The new guide's been in effect since the 4th of November 2024, after a 6-week transition period. So why was an update needed? When it was first released, the Guide to Traffic Generating Development was ahead of its time, with many other jurisdictions adopting elements like trip generation to this day. However, this guidance was last updated 22 years ago, and industry feedback we received indicated a strong need to bring the guide up to contemporary standards. We undertook a first round of industry engagement in late 2022, which included a survey where we received responses from 130 industry stakeholders. This included developers, consultants, and local government representatives across New South Wales. There were diverse views across our industry, in particular between different parts of New South Wales. However, there were some clear drivers for change. These included the old guide contained outdated advice that was no longer aligned with best practice. The GTGD had a heavy focus on traffic and did not consider all parts of the transport system. There was limited travel demand management, or TDM, guidance, despite travel plans often being requested, and aging trip generation rates, with rates dating back to the 1980s and including land uses such as video stores, which did not reflect the changes in travel patterns and technology. These drivers informed the objectives for the new guide. The objectives for the process that we used to update and prepare the new guide was throughout that. 3 objectives gave us our direction for this update, and they guided the development with the aims of ensuring the transport system outcomes are considered in the development of the assessment process, that we provide clear and transparent guidance for developers at the development application stage, and we support the development sector in effectively interfacing with transport to ensure impacts are mitigated and advice to consent authorities is provided in a timely manner. Some of the key changes in the new guide are summarized on this next slide. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at this new guide. It's on the New South Wales Transport Standards portal, which, despite the name, hosts a range of materials, including guidelines, manuals, and standards. If you have seen it, it'll be clear that this update has been from the ground up, starting with industry feedback and research. The document can be downloaded as both an interactive PDF with convenient links or in a print version. The document's broken down into chapters, as seen in the table of contents on the left. The guide's organized in such a way to make it easier to navigate the information you need at a click of a button, whether you're preparing, reviewing, or just learning about transport impact assessments. At a high level, the key changes in the guide can be summarized in 5 key areas: multimodal transport design and development and assessment guidance, new travel demand management and travel plan guidance, detailed guidance on the contents and process for transport impact assessments and transport impact statements, updated trip generation guides and guidance on trip generation methods, and finally, new context-based reference rates for parking guidance and rates. As I said earlier, we took on council, consultant, and development industry feedback and have looked to reflect some of the best practices in New South Wales to move towards our objectives. I'll now hand over to Sahan, who'll go through the changes in some more detail and then move on to how we approached engaging with industry.
Thanks, Jen. It's great to see so many people from around Australia and New Zealand online today. This has been a major update, so I'm happy to go through some of those key changes in a bit more detail. I'll start with the TIA process. So I guess reflecting back, my first use of the former guide to traffic generating developments was at university over a decade ago. We essentially used it as, I guess, reference materials for an assignment in a transport engineering course where we prepared a mock TIA. So with this new guide, we're hoping it'll be able to be used in a similar way for a future generation of transport engineers and planners. So we see chapter 3 as being particularly helpful for that purpose. In there, we've provided a step-by-step process for how to scope, analyze, assess, and document transport impacts of a development, which is particularly helpful for those first working in the TIA space or for those yet to undertake a multimodal TIA. The guide also includes expanded advice on when TIAs are required, and in terms of New South Wales legislative framework, what triggers referrals to Transport for New South Wales, and the level of detail for different scales or complexity of development. We've also included guidance for a more scalable approach to preparing TIAs. There's now 2 types of reports. There's a transport impact assessment and a transport impact statement. Prior to the release of this guideline, we just had transport impact assessments in New South Wales. So transport impact statements are a less detailed report, which reduces the analysis and reporting effort for less complex or smaller developments. The goal here is to enable a level of assessment which is commensurate to the level of impact expected by a proposed development. We've also included an optional checklist in Appendix E to help guide practitioners on items of assessment to consider under different circumstances in a TIS or an impact statement, as opposed to an impact assessment. The next change I'll go through is how we've moved to a more multimodal approach. For some time prior to the release of this new guide, consultants were already preparing TIAs in New South Wales with consideration of impacts for more than just car traffic. But this was undertaken without consistent guidance or clear guidance, and often without a consistent approach as well. So to fill this gap, the draft guide brings in updated guidance with the emphasis on assessing impacts on surrounding transport networks for all modes that interact with a proposed development. The new guide provides primary performance indicators for each mode that can be referenced when undertaking or reviewing a TIA. This aims to provide a simplified and consistent approach to assessing transport network impacts with a single primary indicator for each mode, as opposed to working through multiple. For example, the Transport for New South Wales Walking Space Guide level of service is a primary indicator for walking, and that enables quick and straightforward footpath sizing in different locations and contexts. Ultimately, from a Transport for New South Wales perspective, we wanted all analysis or assessment undertaken to have a purpose or to be material to the DA process. So this approach is intended to ensure assessment effort is again proportional to the anticipated impacts or complexity of the proposed developments. The guide also provides advice on impact mitigation, noting that measures proposed should be relevant to the development and considerate of scope. If we move on to the next one, trip generation is probably the most used element of the current guidance. With the New South Wales trip rates still being used around Australia and New Zealand, but the rates that we have had in the 2002 guidance were beginning to show their age. So the new guide updated the trip generation rates and survey data that we've collected since 2002 when the last guidance was released for a total of 22 new or updated land uses. We've also provided convenient links to all the available data and analysis reports for each of the surveys. So that's currently available online. A key change to support assessment of wider transport network is consideration of person trips by mode rather than vehicle trips. This is supported by person trip rates and new mode share summaries for the surveys we have available. The guide also provides principles, definitions, and factors, as well as the estimate process. The guide also provides new advice on trip generation estimation methods to enable high quality estimates. They are benchmarking, which involves selecting a sample of comparable sites and taking an average of their rates. First principles, which is a more bottom-up estimate based on development assumptions. And finally, the average rate as well, which may be preferred for smaller or simpler DAs. If we move on to access and design, and I guess continuing that focus on a more multimodal approach to TIAs, the chapter on access and design includes expanded guidance beyond the car mode that we saw in the previous guide. We all know that layout and design of site access facilities can have a significant impact on the outcomes for a development and its occupants. The guide provides clearer design guidance for each mode, including walking, cycling, public transport, freight, servicing, and emergency vehicles. Safety is a core consideration in any development, and this outcome can be most influenced in the design phase. Updated guidance is provided to ensure safety of all people accessing or passing by a development. And this is all aligned with our safe systems approach and the New South Wales Towards Zero commitment. We acknowledge that there's also several relevant design standards and guidance documents available, and many have been updated since the last guide in 2002 was released. So that includes Austroads and Australian standards. So this chapter references the relevant guidance documents and provides some supporting commentary on how to apply them in the New South Wales context where necessary. We also note that travel demand management is often overlooked during the design phase. So we've included some guidance on there as well around implementing hard measures to drive higher sustainable mode shares. The guide also provides advice in more detail on travel demand management and travel plans as part of a dedicated chapter. So finally, parking is another key element that practitioners were looking to the guide for. So we updated the approach quite substantially from the previous guide. So following our first round of industry consultation in late 2022, it was pretty clear that there's a wide range of views on parking, but most supported a context-based approach to setting parking rates. The new guide proposes providing greater clarity by stating that parking rates set by local councils in development control plans and local environmental plans will prevail. And then where these rates are unavailable or councils refer to transport's rates, the new guide's rates apply. The new guide moved away from minimum parking rates to new context-based reference parking rates. Reference rates allow for greater flexibility to provide parking at a rate based on the development's context. The context-based rates were developed for key land uses accompanied by a categorization map, which breaks down New South Wales into three broad typologies. The sample of land uses are residential, medium and high density office premises and business parks. Retail and shopping centres was the last one. In addition to the parking rates, a key update is around parking principles with updated guidance for the design of parking areas, including guidance on electric vehicle charging, car share, bicycle and micromobility parking. There's also some guidance for specialised vehicles and urban design considerations included. So as you can see on the map, you've got the three different typologies in there, and you can see a few examples of the rates as well, but the map is an interactive web-based tool. So the next, I guess, item is talking through how we worked with industry to develop the guides. So our approach to developing these new guidelines has been collaborative, evidence-based and robust. As we've mentioned earlier, from the beginning, we've been working closely with industry stakeholders to ensure that the guide meets the needs of its users. I'll run through a quick couple of highlights on our engagement approach and also, I guess, a few lessons learned through the process. So in terms of the users of the guide, one of the first steps we took was to map out all the users of the guideline. This guide is not used just by transport engineers and traffic engineers, but it's also used by planners, developers, university lecturers for a range of different purposes. When we categorize these, we found that broadly we have three main groups of users: developers, transport practitioners, and regulators and assessors. Each of these groups have a unique reason to reference this guide, and when we were setting this up, we looked to try and set it up in such a way that these groups can access the information they need as quickly as possible. The general community are not, I guess, a primary audience of this guide, but they're either directly or indirectly experiencing the outcomes of it. So ultimately, our goal is to drive positive outcomes for the community as well. So that gives you a bit of context on how we were thinking about the different users prior to engaging with industry. But then moving on into our industry engagement approach, we had three broad stages to our industry engagement. As part of the early development, we kicked off with an industry survey, and that allowed practitioners the chance to highlight issues they had with the existing guidance. and flagged areas for improvement for the project team. We also engaged an expert review panel of 4 transport consultants that regularly prepare TIAs all around New South Wales in both small and large developments. This was a really useful process where we were able to iterate the content with a panel of experts to try and make it as practical and useful as possible. We also undertook 2 rounds of legal reviews to ensure the language contained within the technical guideline is appropriate for such a document and also consistent with New South Wales legislative frameworks. Following that first stage, we went out to public consultation with industry stakeholders, which was a great process to basically kick the tires on the draft guide and allow us to update the document in line with the needs of industry. It also allowed us to better plan stage 3, which Henry will highlight soon, highlighting opportunities for our forward work program. So if we just go a little bit deeper on the industry consultation that I mentioned a moment ago, which I guess helped formulate the new guide, we engaged extensively with industry, including an 11-week public consultation period from March to May 2024. We've shared a draft on the New South Wales Government's Have Your Say portal, which was, as I mentioned earlier, informed by the earlier industry survey. I think if we jump to the next slide, we overall, in terms of that industry consultation process, we were frankly overwhelmed by the response that we received. There was a lot of people reaching out to the team, providing positive feedback as well as constructive feedback on where we needed to improve the guide before it was finalised. And just to go through a couple of quick stats, we had 3 webinars and 2 in-person events with attendances from councils, developers, consultants, planners and transport practitioners in partnership with Committee for Sydney and AITPM, with over 500 attendees online and over 120 in person. We had 5 meetings with state and local government forums, including our Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, New South Wales Schools Infrastructure, which builds a lot of the new schools in New South Wales, and Northern Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, which is one of our groupings of councils within New South Wales, and an active transport community of practice, which is a multidisciplined community of practice for active transport. We've had over 50 submissions that we considered, which resulted in over 1,000 comments, and we had over 600 downloads and as part of that process, which again showed really strong interest from industry. We were able to use this industry feedback from engagement to refine, update and publish the guide, which was updated and released in September of last year and became effective on 4th of November last year. As we said a few times today and throughout this presentation, we're really grateful to industry for the contributions made towards that consultation process, as well as things like data and offers of future collaboration as well. So all of that has really helped make this a reality, but also give us some momentum to continue to improve our guidance and supporting resources. I'll now hand over to Henry, who'll run through our future work program and our approach to continuous improvement before we head into the Q&A. Over to you, Henry.
Thank you, Sahan. I'm Henry Chu, Senior Transport Planner and the Project Manager of KITIA. It is great to see so many of you here today. So just to recap, this project has had a long journey. Trust me, it takes we kick off initial consultation, document development, public consultation over a period of 24 months before we release it September last year. We did have a 6 weeks transitional period before GTIA became effective on the 4th of November, as Sahan said. This was important to provide practitioner with time to move to the new approach while not being too long. We are now moving towards a continuous improvement phase where we've learned is a huge improvement, but we acknowledge there are still plenty of opportunities to make it better and keep pace with the evolving transport planning practices. We've committed to release periodic update of the guide. As Sahan said earlier, we are keen to listen to you and the wider industry. And we won't stop now. We'll keep our project mailbox open, and we are continuing to understand the needs of the practitioner and use this insight to form our future work program. We are also exploring opportunities for training and capability development to support better transport outcome, to support development across New South Wales. By now, I'm sure many of you have already downloaded a copy of the guide, and those in New South Wales are using it regularly. On the Transport Standard Portal, which I have already shared a link in the chat earlier, we have hosted this new guideline. We have also prepared a frequently asked questions, which will hopefully answer some of your questions related to GTIA. Apart from the FAQ, you can also find the GTIA release note. In the first part of the release note, it has captured what we have heard during the industry consultation and the respective change we have made to the guide prior to the guide released. The release note has also outlined the future work program we have planned to keep the guide up to date and useful for the industry in New South Wales. As you can see on the screen, we have listed a few of the items for the next for us to undertake in the next 12 months, and item we have in our mind beyond 12 months. In the coming year, we are also going to explore options for training, as well as adding to the travel demand management resources. If I have to pick one of the most frequent requests we have heard, it has to be updating the transport the trip generation survey database. We have started our planning to carry out new multimodal trip generation surveys for a range of land use. However, we know we can only carry out a very limited number of surveys each year. For this exact reason, we are also preparing a practice note which aim to provide clear guidance to the developer and consulting industry to carry out multimodal trip generation survey. On this topic, our team is also working closely with the TRIPS project. Looking further ahead, we would like to strengthen the guidance on TIA and TIS, further explore and establishing a trip generation database for New South Wales. We would appreciate if you could spend some time to go through the release note and let us know what you think we could do to make the guide even better. So just to add on to that, I'm actually the person looking after the GTIA mailbox. So by all means, feel free to send us email. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Any questions, any feedbacks, we'll all take it onto record, and yeah, it will be treated. We will take it on seriously. So that's all we have for today, and we are happy to take questions now. We can jump onto the Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for those presentations. It sounds like a lot of work has gone into all of that. So there's a few questions here. The first from Grace does the new trip generation rate consider post-COVID scenario?
So the kind of initial answer to that is yes and no. So we've got a lot of different land uses that you might see on record, and some of those surveys are pre-COVID and some of those are post-COVID. So that's in terms of the raw data. But in many cases, we felt as though, depending on the use, the behavior will prevail. So what I mean is you may not see work from home in certain like industrial uses and so on. And then the other element is so other approaches like a first principles based trip generation assessment. You could absolutely adopt assumptions based on a post-COVID scenario around, say, a new commercial development or a new residential development and so on. So broadly, we've discussed it, but we've also not necessarily got a consistent level of evidence across all land uses, if that makes sense. But we hope to have that in due course, obviously.
Oh, Jen or Henry, do you want to add anything to that? No, all good. Okay, we've also got a question from Don McKenzie from New Zealand. He's wondering whether you've considered the integrated transport assessments, or what in New Zealand they call ITAs, and their process that's been widely adopted in New Zealand. They've got several guides available, which considers the transport policy and strategy.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, that framework's really valuable, and we definitely had it as part of our kind of early literature review type process where we were trying to gather, I guess, opportunities to improve our New South Wales guidance. So, you know, the multimodal approach and areas around policy alignment, sustainability and environmental impact, and all of those sorts of things are fairly well considered within the New Zealand approach. I think coming into the New South Wales context, one of the challenges is we've got quite a big difference in our regulatory frameworks and some of our policies and local conditions and approaches. So we had to sort of work within those bounds to make sure we produce an updated guideline that kind of best meets our New South Wales policy context and legislative context. And what I mean specifically is we have, you know, development applications as part of our Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And these transport impact assessments are sort of playing a role in supporting that as part of that bigger picture. So yeah, that was kind of the primary reason why it might be quite different, but there's definitely inspiration drawn from those sorts of suites. I don't know if Jen or Henry has anything to add to that.
No, I do know that hopefully the video didn't catch too badly when my eyes wandered off to double check as I was looking it up when the question came in. But yeah, no, we absolutely captured that as part of the understanding and the context and what everyone else is doing, because there's always the opportunity to draw from what has successfully advanced elsewhere, and it was definitely part of the research.
Cool. We've got another question from Don McKenzie about the open access trip generation database. Are you coordinating with the TRIPS Database Bureau? Henry, is that what you were talking about?
The TRIPS, it is, we understand it is led by the University of Sydney, iMove, and the roles transport of New South Wales equivalent in Queensland, and we were invited to be part of their working group, and it is so Sahan, are you on that working group? You could add a little bit more.
Yeah. So as Henry mentioned, there's an iMove project which is TRIPS, and as he's already mentioned, it's sponsored by Queensland's Transport and Main Roads, I believe. and University of Sydney, but there's members from a range of jurisdictions and councils within their working group, myself included. So ultimately that project, I'll paste a link to it in Don's message, or question rather, but essentially they're looking to have a open database of trip generation for for the whole of Australia, and have a means for people to independently submit their data. So we're looking to hook into that if they hopefully succeed in that process, and we've also offered to provide obviously our available data as well, to kind of get that database rolling. But that's kind of where we're at the moment. Still exploratory.
Good. There's a question from Deborah Donald about whether the guide includes topics such as reductions in travel due to people visiting multiple shops in a bulky goods shopping centre, for example. I'm not quite sure I understand that question, but hopefully you do.
Yeah. So I think probably what she's referencing is, I don't know, say you have a Costco, an IKEA, and a Bunnings or something all right next to each other. We have one in at northwest of Sydney, which is in Marsden Park, which is an example of that. And I guess what's being referenced there is someone might make a trip and be shopping for a bed or something at IKEA, and then go, oh no, I'm going to pop over to Costco. Oh no, I'm going to build my own at Bunnings. And it's all one trip chained essentially. And we definitely have provided guidance on how that may be considered in different, I guess, development types or land uses. But again, there is a level of, context consideration in there, because we can't say, all bulky goods will lead to trip chaining, because in some cases you'll have 3 or 4 different bulky goods stores that don't really have commonality in its customer base, for example. So some are only sort of B2B or business to business sales, and then some are business to consumer only, and so on. So we've provided guidance, but ultimately there's going to be a level of judgment that'll lie on those preparing assessments as well as those reviewing assessments in different circumstances, if that makes sense.
Okay, good. Another question here is, how do the new trip generation rates compare to the previous guidance? He's just asking, he or she is just asking broadly in terms of increase or decrease, or any land use category that has had significant change. Can you give some vague idea about which way things have gone?
Yeah, there's definitely been a few with, I don't think we've got any sort of general catch-all that I could give you. One is that now that we've got multimodal trips for many of particularly the newer surveys, that's a considerable change, where in the past we'd be a bit in the dark for the non-car trips. And in the New South Wales and Sydney context, this is particularly relevant because we've got some stations bus stops, etc., which are at capacity. So it's worth being able to have a grasp of what that impact is on those other modes. But with respect to how they've changed, I don't have a kind of a flat number or anything that I can give you off the top of my head. Definitely, if you look at the newer post-COVID numbers for, say, origin trips, so for example, residential, you do see a lower rate in the AM and PM peaks than you would have pre-COVID. But if you look at something like retail or something like that, which we haven't done a new survey post-COVID yet, it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of those will be. So for example, click and collect orders and so on.
I can add on a little bit on that.
Yep.
in 3 months' time, we may be able to give you a more definite answer, because we have just planned it for to retake some of the chip generation survey at some site we have done like 10 years ago. So in 3 months' time, we'll be having a new set of data at the same sites. We have it was high density residential farm, for your information. So we are looking into that in short.
But in terms of all land uses, we don't really have kind of a flat answer at the moment. We're just gradually trying to build up that evidence base to help everyone out.
Cool. A question here from Navid. Did you consider any methodology for internal interaction between different land uses in multi-land usage complex? That's sort of a bit similar to the bulky items question, isn't it?
Yeah. It's fairly similar to that. We have a few kind of bits of guidance and principles around this sort of consideration, but again, it was difficult to come up with like a flat approach, just because depending on the context, the different land uses considered, and how you arrange your access and so on. There's a lot of variability. So we've added a lot of things to consider as part of that process, but not necessarily a black and white methodology for how you'd undertake that in all circumstances.
Oh, here's a very interesting question. The UK are moving away from the TRIPS approach to some degree because it is historical and may disincentivise vision-led planning where there isn't a precedent. Was this considered in the new guide? And then Richard has put in a comment as well. They've moved away from intersection assessments, noting that in cities there is no scope to improve due to land constraints, etc. Has the same been adopted in your guide?
Yeah, so we've definitely looked at a vision-led approach. In many cases, we have place plans throughout the state in many different precincts. And Jen can probably add a bit to this in a moment. But essentially, we found that if we go down a benchmark approach, so in other words, looking at sites with similar levels of access to your proposed development, that essentially helps you achieve this sort of goal. So what I mean by that is in New South Wales, we have this sort of record investment in public transport with new metros and everything popping up. So it can be quite difficult to plan a new development around a metro that's not open yet. So having this sort of benchmark-based approach helps design those new developments to take most advantage of that new infrastructure. It is a bit easier where you have an existing station that's already operating, but I think in particular that vision-led approach kind of can go a step further in those metro type circumstances or cases. Jen, I don't know if you've got anything further to add.
Yeah, a little. I mean, it's an evolving discussion. Desire and New South Wales is committed to a vision-led process. We're developing our new integrated transport plans with a strong and detailed vision, so you could understand that a change to the network, if what you're proposing is movement towards that vision or not. Unfortunately, we don't have all of these plans in place at a stage where you can understand specifically what the vision for a piece of infrastructure, a road in a local area is as an agreed outcome. So therefore, saying what's acceptable as a result of that. So that's why it's evolving to that benchmarking. But in GITIA, you're encouraged to understand where there are these plans for change and local councils and the development control plans, what they're working towards should be influencing the discussion of what you're proposing, but needing to provide some numbers to set people off rather than asking people to interpret broader visions at the statewide level was a consideration through this process. So we're working on it. We're hopeful. It's our intention.
Okay, that sort of leads into Navid's second question. Did you consider any methodology for estimating mode shift in case of new public transport development?
Yeah, I think that example I mentioned earlier is probably a good one in that we have several cases of developments in New South Wales which have quite high mode shares for public and active transport. So having data on how those developments move, or the people within those developments move, helps us understand how we could do a similar development in another location or in another context, and looking at kind of the success factors in that case. So in the guide, we do have some guidance around promoting the use of public transport, including the travel demand management chapter that we've got in there.
Okay, here's a more detailed question from Matthew. The traffic generation rates for shopping centres and small suburban shopping centres seem excessively high. For example, 3,800 square metres of retail development would have a trip generation of 760 vehicles per hour due to the formula being vehicle trips per metre squared of floor area. Can you clarify that, or is that a bit too detailed to clarify directly?
That's probably a bit too detailed for me to clarify without a spreadsheet in front of me, I think. But I'll have a look into that one.
Okay. And then Aaron would like to know what land use types are Transport considering undertaking new trip generation surveys for? Are there any particular land uses that are considered the priority?
Yeah, so and Henry can probably jump through the list, but essentially when we released this guide, we had a supporting release note which also spoke to the future trip generation surveys we'd look at. At the moment, we're open to sort of industry contributions / suggestions of like priority land uses to look at. But as Henry mentioned a moment ago, we're looking at updating a lot of our residential land uses, given in terms of the number of DAs that come through these kind of medium and large residential developments are becoming increasingly common. So we wanted to make sure we've got an up-to-date evidence base for those, but other ones coming down the line as well. I don't know, Henry, if you just want to rattle off a couple of potential ones. Nothing's confirmed yet in terms of that longer term pipeline of surveys.
So what's in the pipeline we are looking at the moment, for example, some new land use that doesn't exist in 20 years ago. For example, the one we are looking at the moment is data center. And then there are, from the industry consultation, we have heard from the industry, there's a lot of, for example, wind farm, solar farm that's in the regional area. But then we have discussed that, for example, for the case of wind farm and solar farm, it is a new land use. But apart from the traffic generated during the construction stage, like on day-to-day operational, it will be close to zero, right? So if it doesn't have a huge impact on the transport network, we will rather focus our resources on some other land use. As Hans suggested, housing is what we are the hot topics at the moment, and we are exactly doing new sets of survey for residential, whether it is high density, mid density, in area with good public transport, not so good public transport, so on and so forth.
Good. I'd just like to throw in my own question, which is how can other states benefit from this? You've had a long gestation period, you've put a lot of work into it, a lot of consultation. If you can share what you've got and how you've got there with the other states, can they shorten the period of time they need to redevelop their own guidelines? And is there any Austroads arrangement whereby these sorts of learnings can be shared?
Yeah, I'll have a first go at this one, but I think in terms of opportunities for other jurisdictions, I'm hoping that like a lot of our approach and lessons learned around engaging with industry early are kind of taken seriously. Because I think that there's sort of a twofold benefit to that process as well. One is obviously we get a good understanding of what the users of the guidance want, and we can do our best to try and meet those needs before we go out for consultation. And the second thing is, I think it also drives a bit of almost passion and enthusiasm from industry in terms of, you know, they will express that they want this updated and let everyone know about it. So just that element will help, you know, have some momentum in terms of getting these through your internal processes and that sort of thing as well. So that's probably a couple of key learnings. I don't know, Jen, if you want to add anything further.
No, but I think in the spirit of collaboration, we're very keen to, as other jurisdictions want to move forward with this, happy to discuss and engage with them. And, you know, we've proactively sharing our information to be of benefit to others.
Cool, that's really good, and hopefully the other states in Australia and New Zealand can benefit from the good work that you've done and redevelop their guidelines at the same time. So look, we're just about up to time. There's a couple of more detailed questions in there which perhaps our presenters can respond to offline. So I'll bring things to a close, but I'd just like to mention a couple of things before we go. The first one is that we have our annual breakfast meeting coming up on the 25th of March. It's at the RACV Club in Melbourne. So anyone from other states is also welcome to attend if you can get down to Melbourne on that date. And the guest speaker will be Gabrielle Williams, who's the Victorian Minister for Transport Infrastructure and Public and Active Transport. So we're very pleased to have got Gabrielle to come along to be our guest speaker. It's always a very good event. So if you would like to book, it's all on the ITE website. And we also have another webinar coming up on Thursday this week. It's sponsored by the Young ITE group. It'll be at 12:30, so another sort of lunchtime arrangement about integrated transport planning. And Knowles Tivendale, who's the Director of Movement and Place Consulting, will be the speaker at that event. So if you'd like to attend any of those things, please do so. Otherwise, that's sort of the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for attending. It was good to see the amount of interest in this, which was fantastic. So stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.